A retired MMA fighter picks on an old couple at their favorite restaurant, shoving the 74-year-old Vietnam veteran from his chair and threatening his terrified wife. The muscular bully towers over the helpless elderly man, using racial slurs, while his crew films the humiliation for social media. But the quiet stranger reading a newspaper in the corner booth isn't just another customer. This is Donnie Yin himself. The arrogant fighter has no idea he just terrorized a war hero in front of a martial arts legend who spent decades perfecting the art of destroying bullies. While the thug continues his assault, demanding the old couple's table, the Wing Chun master rises with deadly calm. The elderly veteran recognizes his savior and grips his wife's hand, knowing justice is about to be served. The bully's friends keep recording, thinking they're capturing another easy victory, but they're actually filming their leader's last moments of confidence. What happens when you pick the wrong fight in front of a living legend? Will the MMA fighter survive learning why some masters never need to prove themselves? What happened next would haunt the bully's arrogance for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Geary Boulevard as May Pham carefully helped her husband Harold out of their weathered Honda Civic. At 72, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades caring for others, her small hands steady as she retrieved Harold's walker from the back seat. "Take your time, my love," she whispered in Vietnamese, watching as Harold, 74, and bearing the invisible scars of a war fought half a century ago, steadied himself against the car door. His Vietnam War veteran cap sat proudly on his silver hair, the Purple Heart pin catching the light as he adjusted his grip on the walker's handles. Golden Dragon Restaurant beckoned them, with its familiar red lanterns and hand-painted signs, a beacon of warmth in San Francisco's Richmond district. For 8 years, every Thursday at 6:30 sharp, the Phams had made this pilgrimage. It wasn't just dinner. It was ritual, community, home. The brass bell above the door chimed their arrival, and David Chun looked up from the host station with a genuine smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Pham," he said in Vietnamese, his voice carrying the respect reserved for honored elders. "Table 7 is ready for you." Harold's weathered face creased into a smile as he navigated slowly between the closely spaced tables, May's protective hand hovering near his elbow. The restaurant hummed with the comfortable sounds of families sharing meals, the clink of chopsticks against ceramic bowls, the soft murmur of conversations in Mandarin and Cantonese, the occasional burst of laughter from a table of teenagers celebrating a birthday. Uncle Harold. Linda Chun emerged from behind the counter, her nursing school scrubs traded for a simple Golden Dragon t-shirt. At 22, she moved with the quick energy of youth, but her bow to the elderly couple carried the reverence of old traditions. "How are you feeling? Did the physical therapy help with your knee?" Harold's eyes twinkled. "Much better, little one. Your generation keeps us old soldiers moving." He settled into his usual chair by the window, the one that let him watch the street while keeping his back to the wall. Old habits from dangerous times and dangerous places. May arranged their belongings with the same care she applied to everything. Harold's reading glasses beside the soy sauce, her small purse with its treasured family photos within easy reach, the folded newspaper Harold would read after dinner positioned just so, the familiar aromas of five spice and garlic, ginger and star anise, wrapped around them like an embrace. This corner of America smelled like the Vietnam of their youth, before the bombs and the exodus, before the refugee camps and the desperate journey to a new world. "The usual?" Linda asked, though she already knew the answer. "Beef pho for me," Harold said, his English still carrying the slight accent of his birthplace. "Extra lime. Lemongrass chicken," May added, then switched to Vietnamese. "Not too spicy tonight. My stomach isn't what it used to be." As Linda hurried toward the kitchen, Harold reached across the table to cover May's hand with his own. 47 years of marriage had taught them to treasure these quiet moments. The simple pleasure of sharing a meal in safety, surrounded by the chosen family of their adopted community. In the corner booth, a man in simple dark clothing sat alone, reading a Chinese newspaper. May had noticed him before during their weekly visits, always in the same spot, always quiet and respectful. Something about his stillness caught her attention. That man, she murmured to Harold, nodding subtly. Toward the corner. He's been here before. Harold glanced over and nodded respectfully. The stranger returned the gesture with equal courtesy before returning to his newspaper. The restaurant door chimed again, its cheerful sound cutting through the evening's peace. Like a blade. Rex, the hammer, Kowalski filled the doorway like a storm cloud, his massive frame blocking the last rays of sunlight. At 38, he carried himself with the predatory confidence of someone accustomed to taking what he wanted. Through intimidation, his expensive athletic wear, designer compression shirt stretched tight across his muscled chest, premium sneakers that cost more than most people's rent, announced his success in the only language he understood, dominance. Behind him, Danny, Walsh and Mike Torres followed like eager shadows. Both were younger, leaner, but they shared the same hungry look of men who had learned that fear opened doors money couldn't budge. Danny's nervous energy crackled as he surveyed the restaurants. Patrons, while Mike's thick fingers drummed against his thigh in a rhythm that suggested pharmaceutical enhancement. Jesus, what a dump, Rex announced, his voice carrying the practiced projection of someone who enjoyed making others uncomfortable. Several elderly diners looked up from their meals, faces creasing with worry. Smells like my grandmother's basement. When's the last time they cleaned this place? David Chun approached with the diplomatic smile of a man who had dealt with difficult customers before, but something in Rex's posture, the way he planted his feet, the casual cruelty in his scanning gaze, set off alarm bells. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Golden Dragon. Table for 3. Rex ignored the greeting, his pale eyes sweeping the dining room like a general surveying conquered territory. His gaze lingered on the elderly patrons with undisguised contempt, cataloging weakness with the precision of a predator selecting prey. Yeah, about that, Rex said, stepping close enough to David that the restaurant owner had to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. I want the best table in the house. Prime real estate. None of this back corner bullshit. David's smile never wavered, but his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. Of course, sir. I have several excellent options available. That one. Rex pointed directly at table 7, where Harold was carefully lifting a spoonful of pho to his lips while May cut her lemongrass chicken into manageable pieces. Perfect view, good lighting. That's where we're sitting. I'm sorry, sir, but that table is currently occupied by, I can see that. Rex's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried further than his previous shouting. 2 old people who look like they're half dead already. They won't mind moving. The restaurant had grown quiet except for the soft bubble of the soup pot and the distant hum of traffic on Geary Boulevard. Even the birthday celebration had fallen silent, teenagers staring with the morbid fascination of youth witnessing adult cruelty. Danny shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the door as if considering escape. Maybe we should just take another table, Rex. This place gives me the creeps anyway. Shut up. Rex's backhand caught Danny across the shoulder hard enough to make him stumble. I didn't ask for your opinion. When I want advice from someone who couldn't last 2 rounds with a drunk soccer mom, I'll let you know. Mike laughed on cue, the sound sharp and unpleasant in the restaurant's warm atmosphere. Linda Chen watched from behind the counter, her phone already in her hand. Her father caught her eye and shook his head almost imperceptibly. Not yet. David had survived the Cultural Revolution as a child. He understood the delicate mathematics of violence, the precise moment when retreat became impossible and resistance became necessary. Rex studied the FAMs with the calculating gaze of a collector, examining insects. Harold continued eating with steady dignity, but May's hand had found his wrist, her fingers wrapped around his pulse point in a gesture both protective and vulnerable. Look at them, Rex said, his voice carrying clearly across the restaurant. Probably don't even speak English. Taking up space that could go to real Americans who actually contribute to society. The casual racism hit the room like a physical blow. Several patrons looked away, faces flushed with shame and helplessness. Others pulled out their phones, uncertain whether to call for help or simply document the unfolding cruelty. David stepped forward, his diplomatic mask finally slipping. Sir, I must ask you to. You must ask me nothing. Rex turned the full force of his attention on David, and the restaurant owner took an involuntary step backward. Maybe I'll ask them myself. face to face. See if they understand the concept of respect. In the corner booth, the quiet man with the newspaper slowly, carefully, folded the pages and set them aside. Donnie Yin had been seeking invisibility for 6 months, and Golden Dragon Restaurant had become his sanctuary. 3 times a week, he occupied the same corner booth, ordered the same simple meal, steamed fish, white rice, green tea, and disappeared into the comfortable anonymity of being just another customer in David Chin's family establishment. The irony wasn't lost on him. After decades of global fame, of cameras tracking his every movement and fans analyzing his every gesture, he had found peace in a place where no one asked for autographs or selfies. Here, he was simply the polite gentleman who paid in cash, spoke softly, and never caused trouble. David's father had recognized him on his second visit, the old man's eyes widening with the sudden comprehension of a film enthusiast meeting his hero. But Mr. Chun had possessed the wisdom to keep the secret, understanding intuitively that some legends needed refuge from their own mythology. Now, watching Rex Kowalski's performance of casual brutality, Donnie felt the familiar weight of responsibility, settling on his shoulders like an old coat. His martial artist's eye cataloged details others would miss. Rex's right shoulder favored his left by perhaps 2 degrees, suggesting an old injury that would affect his punching power. His pupils were slightly dilated despite the restaurant's dim lighting, stimulants, probably amphetamines. His companions carried themselves with the nervous energy of armed men trying to look casual. Most telling of all was Rex's stance. Weight. Slightly forward on the balls of his feet, hands unconsciously forming loose fists, shoulders rolled forward in the aggressive posture of someone who had learned just enough technique to be dangerous to civilians. This wasn't a man who fought other trained fighters anymore. This was a predator who specialized in victims. Donnie had seen the type before, in action films and unfortunately in real life. Failed fighters who turned their incomplete skills against those who couldn't defend themselves. Finding in cruelty the validation their careers had never provided, he considered intervening immediately, but decades of experience had taught him patience. Sometimes situations diffused naturally when given space. Sometimes showing restraint prevented greater violence down the road. The old couple seemed dignified, and David Chun appeared capable of managing difficult customers. But Rex's body language was escalating, not cooling. The way he had positioned himself between the elderly couple and the exit, the calculated cruelty of his racism, the predatory satisfaction in his voice. All signs pointed toward someone who had come here not for dinner, but for the entertainment. Value of terrorizing the vulnerable. Donnie's breathing shifted subtly, his body's autonomic systems preparing for action even as his conscious mind counseled patience. 47 years of martial arts training had made violence preparation as natural as walking, but wisdom meant knowing when that preparation should become action. The newspaper crinkled softly as he set it aside, the sound somehow carrying clearly despite the restaurant's muted tension. Several patrons glanced his way, drawn by some indefinable change in the atmosphere. Linda Chin caught his eye from behind the counter, and he saw recognition flicker across her young face, not of his identity, but of his intent. Harold Pham continued eating with the steady dignity of someone who had faced worse threats than schoolyard bullies, but his wife's protective positioning spoke of deep fear. The old soldier's hands remained steady on his chopsticks, but Donnie noticed the subtle way he had shifted his walker closer, the almost imperceptible squaring of his shoulders that suggested military training asserting itself despite his age and infirmity. Rex was approaching their table now, his voice carrying clearly, "You folks are in my seat." Donnie watched Harold look up with the calm gaze of someone who had stared down death in Vietnamese jungles, meeting Rex's aggression with a dignity that seemed to infuriate the younger man further. "Young man, we ordered first. Please show respect. For your elders." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Donnie saw Rex's face flush with rage at being called young man by someone he had already categorized as prey. This was the moment, the precise instant when a bad situation became dangerous, when retreat became impossible and violence became inevitable. Donnie's hands unclenched on the table, his weight shifting almost imperceptibly as his body prepared for action. In the reflection of the window, he could see the entire restaurant's layout, every exit and obstacle, Every innocent bystander who would need protection if this escalated to Rex's hand was rising now, moving toward Harold's shoulder with unmistakable intent. Harold Pham had faced down Viet Cong soldiers in the jungle darkness of 1968, had translated desperate pleas for mercy, and delivered final messages from dying men to wives they would never see again. The scarred bully looming over his dinner table was dangerous, yes, but Harold had learned long ago that the most effective response to intimidation was quiet dignity. "Young man," he repeated, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak. "We ordered first. Please show respect for your elders." Rex's face flushed crimson, the casual racism transforming into something more personal and vicious. Respect? For what? Two ancient relics taking up space real Americans could use. His voice climbed toward a shout, drawing stares from every corner of the restaurant. "You probably can't even understand what I'm saying, can you, old man?" May's small hand found Harold's wrist, her fingers wrapping around his pulse point in. A gesture that was both protective and desperate. She had seen this before, in the refugee camps, during the dangerous early years in America when they had been just another immigrant family struggling to survive in an unwelcoming world. "Harold," she whispered in Vietnamese, her voice barely audible. "We should go." But Harold's military bearing asserted itself, the steel spine that had carried him through combat and 40 years of construction work refusing to bend before a bully. "We have done nothing wrong," he said quietly, his English precise despite his accent. "We are customers here, same as anyone." "Same as anyone?" Rex leaned down, placing both palms flat on the table hard enough to make the soup bowls jump. "You're not the same as anyone, old man. You're leftovers from a war nobody cares about anymore, taking up space in a neighborhood that's moving on without you." The restaurant had fallen into the terrible silence that accompanies public cruelty, patrons looking away in shame or staring in horrified fascination. David Chin started forward from behind the host station, but Rex's companions moved to intercept him, their positioning clearly practiced. "Please," David said, his diplomatic mask finally cracking. "These are good people. They've been coming here for years." "I don't care if they've been coming here since the fucking Mayflower," Rex snarled, never taking his eyes off Harold. "They're done now. Time for them to find somewhere else to pretend they belong." Harold tried to stand, his hands gripping his walker as he attempted to rise with whatever dignity remained to him. But Rex's palm shot out, pressing against the old man's shoulder and shoving him back into his chair with casual, calculated force. The sound May made was barely human, a small cry of anguish and terror as she watched her husband's frail body absorb the impact. Harold's face went pale, his breathing shallow as pain shot through joints that had been rebuilt twice after wartime shrapnel had shattered them. "Stay down, Grandpa," Rex said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his previous shouting. "You're not going anywhere until I say you can go." Linda Chin pulled her phone from her pocket, fingers flying across the screen as she tried to dial 911. Rex spotted the movement and crossed the restaurant in 3 quick strides, his hand closing over the device before she could complete the call. "I don't think so, sweetheart." The phone shattered against the floor tiles, plastic and glass scattering across the restaurant like confetti. "This is a private conversation between me and the old folks. No need to involve the authorities." David Chin stepped forward, his face flushed with anger that overrode his natural caution. "That's my daughter. Take your hands off." Mike Torres materialized at David's shoulder, thick fingers gripping the restaurant owner's arm with enough pressure to leave bruises. "Your daughter should learn some manners," he said, his voice carrying the flat effect of someone accustomed to violence. Just like her old man. Across the restaurant, Harold sat trapped in his chair, May's protective embrace the only barrier between him and Rex's escalating rage. His walker lay on its side, 3 feet away, knocked over during the confrontation and now impossibly out of reach. Without it, Harold was as helpless as Rex had intended him to be. The birthday celebration had dissolved into frightened whispers. Teenagers filming the confrontation with their phones while their parents tried to decide between intervention and escape. Elderly patrons clutched their teacups with shaking hands, recognizing themselves in Harold's vulnerability and understanding that they could be next at in the corner booth, A chair scraped softly against the floor as the quiet stranger stood up. His newspaper folded and forgotten. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward the sound, drawn by something indefinable. A change in the atmosphere as subtle and unmistakable as the moment before lightning strikes. The man was unremarkable in every way that mattered to someone like Rex Kowalski. Average height, simple clothes, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. But his movement carried a quality that made seasoned fighters take notice, a centered balance that spoke of decades spent perfecting the art of controlled violence. He approached with measured steps, his hands visible and open, his expression calm but serious. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the restaurant's tense silence like a blade through silk. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Rex turned from his intimidation of David Chun to face this new challenger, his predatory instincts immediately cataloging the stranger's weaknesses. Average height, unremarkable build, probably mid-40s, another soft civilian who thought he could play hero. The kind of man Rex had been crushing for years, both in and out of the ring. Misunderstanding. Rex stepped closer, using his 6-inch height advantage to loom over the stranger. "The only misunderstanding here is you thinking this is any of your business, pal." The man maintained a respectful distance, his posture relaxed but somehow coiled, like a spring at rest but ready for action. "I think it is my business when I see someone threatening elderly people who can't defend themselves." His accent was slight, his English precise, and something in his tone made several restaurant patrons look up from their phones with sudden interest. There was authority in his voice, the kind that came not from volume or aggression, but from absolute certainty. "Danny." Walsh shifted nervously behind Rex, his drug-enhanced paranoia picking up signals his conscious mind couldn't interpret. "Rex, maybe we should just shut your mouth." Rex's backhand caught Danny across the jaw hard enough to snap his head sideways. "I'm handling this." The stranger watched the casual violence with eyes that missed nothing, his expression unchanged but somehow more focused. "There's no need for anyone to get hurt here," he said quietly. "Why don't you and your friends find another restaurant? I'm sure there are places that would be happy to serve you." Rex laughed, the sound sharp and ugly in the restaurant's tense atmosphere. "You offering to pay for our dinner somewhere else, old man? That's real generous of you. But see, I like this place. I like this table. And I don't like being told what to do by some nobody who doesn't know when to mind his own business." He stepped closer, close enough that the stranger would have to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. Close enough to smell the fear that Rex was certain would come rolling off this Good Samaritan like cheap cologne. Instead, he found himself looking into eyes that held the flat calm of someone who had seen violence in all its forms and found it unremarkable. There was no fear there, no anger, no desperation, just the patient assessment of a professional evaluating a problem that required solving. "My name," the stranger said, his voice carrying clearly through the restaurant, "is Donnie Yen." The reaction was immediate and electric. Linda Chun gasped audibly from behind the counter, her hand flying to her mouth. Several elderly patrons sat up straighter, recognition dawning on their faces like sunrise. David Chin's eyes widened with something approaching reverence, and from the kitchen came the sound of Mr. Chun dropping a ladle into the soup pot. Rex had no idea what the name was supposed to mean, but the restaurant's reaction told him it was significant. Some local tough guy, probably. Maybe someone with a reputation in Chinatown. It didn't matter. Reputation was just another word for intimidation, and Rex had built his entire adult life on being the most intimidating person in any room. "Donnie Yen," he repeated mockingly. "Am I supposed to be impressed? You some kind of big shot around here." The stranger, Donnie Yen, simply waited, his hands still open at his sides, his breathing steady and controlled. Around the restaurant, phones were rising as patrons began to record, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Rex drew his fist back, muscles coiling with the practiced motion of someone who had ended dozens of fights. With a single punch, the moment stretched like a wire pulled taut, the entire restaurant holding its breath as Rex's fist cocked back with practiced precision. His shoulders rolled forward, weight shifting to his back foot in the textbook setup for a devastating right cross. The same punch that had ended his last 3 street fights before they truly began. Linda Chun whispered to her father in rapid Cantonese, her voice barely audible, but somehow carrying clearly in the charged silence. Bah, that's the martial arts movie star. The real one. David's response was equally quiet but weighted with awe. IP man. Around the restaurant, recognition rippled through the older patrons like electricity. Mrs. Liu at table 3 fumbled for her reading glasses, squinting at Donnie with the desperate hope of someone who had spent decades watching heroes on screen and never dreamed of meeting one in person. The elderly man by the window pulled out his phone not to call for help, but to record what might be the most significant moment of his life. Rex remained oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, seeing only another middle-aged Asian man who needed to learn the hard way about minding his own business. He had no idea that he was squaring off against someone whose fight choreography had influenced an entire generation of action filmmakers, whose real martial arts skills had been forged in decades of traditional training before Hollywood ever discovered him. Last chance to walk away, Rex snarled, his fist trembling with barely contained violence. I don't know what kind of reputation you think you have in this neighborhood, but I guarantee you've never faced anyone like me. Donnie's response was to shift his weight almost imperceptibly, his stance becoming somehow more centered, more rooted. To untrained eyes, he appeared unchanged, still calm, still open-handed, still unremarkable. But Harold Pham, whose military experience had taught him to recognize dangerous men regardless of their appearance, gripped May's hand tighter and whispered, "Move back, beloved. This man is a warrior." The birthday party at table 5 had gone. Completely silent, teenagers staring with the morbid fascination of youth witnessing something their TikTok feeds had never prepared them for. Their parents were equally transfixed, caught between the urge to flee and the impossible possibility that they were about to watch a legend in action. Danny Walsh took an involuntary step backward, his drug-addled instincts finally registering what his conscious mind refused to acknowledge. Something was very wrong with this picture. The way the restaurant staff looked at this guy, the way the old people were sitting up straighter, the way the air itself seemed to crackle with anticipation, none of it made sense for some random do-gooder sticking his nose where it didn't belong. "Rex," Danny said, his voice cracking slightly. "Maybe we should shut up." Rex's patience finally snapped completely. The accumulated frustrations of his failed career, his mounting debts, his growing desperation, all crystallized into pure rage directed at this insignificant obstacle standing between him and easy money. His right cross launched with all the power his 220 pounds could generate, a punch that had dropped men half again his size, aimed directly at Donnie's jaw with enough force to shatter bone. For a split second, it looked like it would connect devastatingly. Rex's form was textbook. Perfect, his timing flawless, his target stationary and apparently unprepared. Several patrons flinched in anticipation of the impact, certain they were about to witness a brutal assault. Then Donnie moved. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, just a subtle shift of angle, a gentle redirection of Rex's extended arm, and suddenly, the devastating punch was traveling through empty air while Rex stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him past his target and into the space where Donnie had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. Donnie hadn't even raised his hands. Rex spun around, bewildered and enraged, his face flushed with embarrassment as scattered applause broke out from the elderly patrons. He had thrown his best punch, the one that never missed, and somehow he had hit nothing but air. Rex's confusion lasted exactly 3 seconds before transforming into the kind of rage that had ended his MMA career, blind, destructive fury that obliterated strategy and left only the primitive need to hurt something. His face went crimson as scattered chuckling from the elderly patrons reached his ears, the ultimate humiliation for someone whose entire identity was built on physical dominance. "You got lucky," he snarled, squaring up again, this time dropping into a more orthodox fighting stance. "Let's see you dodge this one, old man." Danny and Mike moved to flank Donnie, their positioning clearly practiced despite their obvious reluctance. Danny's nervous energy had crystallized into jittery aggression, while Mike's pharmaceutical courage made him flex his thick fingers in anticipation. Harold Pham tried to warn Donnie despite his own helplessness. "Sir, there are 3 of them. I can see that," Donnie replied gently, never taking his eyes off Rex. His voice carried the same calm patience a teacher might use with a particularly slow student. "Thank you for your concern." Rex charged forward with a wrestling takedown attempt, his amateur MMA training finally asserting itself over street fighting instincts. Arms extended, shoulders low, he aimed to drive Donnie backward into the wall, where superior size and strength would decide the outcome. What happened next unfolded with the fluid precision of a masterclass in classical martial arts. Donnie's hands moved with lightning speed, intercepting Rex's grasping arms at the wrists in a perfect Wing Chun trapping technique. Before Rex could adjust, Donnie's right hand snaked forward in a chain punch. Not one strike, but three rapid-fire hits to the solar plexus that drove the air from Rex's lungs and left him gasping. As Rex doubled over, Donnie attacked from the left with a wild haymaker. Donnie pivoted smoothly, his left arm sweeping upward in a back fist that caught Donnie square in the temple. The younger man's eyes rolled back as he collapsed, his consciousness departing so quickly that his body forgot to fall dramatically. Mike hesitated for a fatal half-second, his drug-enhanced reflexes no match for a lifetime of combat training. Donnie stepped inside his guard as if the larger man were moving through molasses, applied a precise nerve strike to the bundle of nerves below Mike's left armpit, and watched as his opponent's arms went numb and useless. The entire exchange had taken perhaps 15 seconds. Rex struggled to straighten, his breathing labored and his face pale with shock. This wasn't how fights went in his world. Opponents were supposed to be intimidated by his size, overwhelmed by his aggression, defeated by his superior conditioning. They weren't supposed to dismantle him with techniques that looked more like dance than combat. "How?" he wheezed, clutching his ribs where Donnie's chain punches had found their mark. 47 years of training, Donnie said simply, adjusting his shirt with the casual gesture of someone who had barely exerted himself. "Would you like to continue, or shall we discuss more civilized ways to resolve this?" Around the restaurant, the response was electric. Elderly patrons who had been terrorized moments before were now applauding openly, their faces bright with vindication. Linda Chun was recording on her phone, her nursing student's composure completely abandoned in favor of pure fangirl excitement. Even the teenagers at the birthday table were cheering, their social media instincts recognizing viral gold when they saw it. Rex looked around the restaurant with dawning horror, seeing his humiliation reflected in dozens of delighted faces. His tough guy reputation, carefully cultivated over years of intimidating the vulnerable, was crumbling in real time before an audience that would ensure everyone in the neighborhood heard about it by morning. "This isn't over," he managed, struggling toward the door while his companions recovered their senses. Donnie swayed on his feet like a drunk, while Mike sat against the wall still trying to understand why his arms wouldn't respond to his commands. As the three stumbled toward the exit, Rex's phone slipped from his pocket, sliding across the restaurant floor to rest beneath table 4. In his haste to escape further humiliation, he never noticed its absence. Donnie knelt beside Harold's overturned walker, righting it with careful hands before helping the elderly veteran to his feet. "Are you injured, sir?" Harold gripped Donnie's arm with surprising strength, his eyes bright with recognition that went deeper than celebrity. This was one warrior acknowledging another, across decades and cultures, and the vast gulf between legend and reality. "Thank you," Harold said simply. Donnie retrieved Rex's abandoned phone, his expression growing serious as he glanced at the screen. The abandoned phone's screen glowed with incoming messages, and what Donnie saw there transformed his moment of victory into something far more ominous. His martial artist's instincts, honed by decades of reading opponents and situations, immediately recognized the difference between random violence and calculated menace. "David," he called quietly, his voice carrying a new urgency that cut through the restaurant's celebratory atmosphere. "Could you come here, please?" The restaurant owner approached with the mixture of gratitude and awe that comes from watching childhood heroes materialize in real life. But Donnie's expression sobered him quickly. This wasn't the face of someone savoring victory, but of a protector who had just discovered the true scope of the threat. "Look at this," Donnie said, tilting the phone screen so David could read. The messages. The text thread painted a picture that chilled both men, detailed instructions about clearing out the old-timers, references to Phase 2 of the Richmond Project, and most disturbing of all, A photograph of Harold and May taken yesterday outside their apartment building, complete with their address and daily routine. David's face went pale as he scrolled through the messages. This wasn't random, he whispered. They were specifically targeting the fams. And probably others, Donnie replied grimly. He showed David additional messages discussing Golden Dragon Restaurant, elderly customers at other neighborhood businesses, and payments for intimidation services. The scope was systematic, organized, and deeply personal. Linda appeared at her father's shoulder, her nursing school training making her quick to spot patterns. Dad, remember Mrs. Nakamura's grandson went missing last month? And Mr. Kim's grocery store failing that inspection? And, all connected, Donnie finished, his investigation instincts taking over. He photographed the messages with his own phone, building evidence while the trail was still fresh. The mysterious V mentioned throughout the text was clearly coordinating multiple harassment campaigns across the Richmond district. Harold, still shaky but determined to understand the threat, joined the group gathered around the phone. Young man, he said to Donnie, his military experience recognizing the signs of organized persecution. We have seen this before. Someone wants us gone. May clutched Harold's arm, her earlier terror giving way to the grim understanding of someone who had fled one systematic campaign of displacement only to encounter another. They study us, she said quietly. They know where we live, when we shop, what we do. This is not random hate. This is planning. As if summoned by their conversation, a new message appeared on Rex's phone. Status report. Did the old couple get the message? The restaurant fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Rex had been merely the opening move in a larger game, and his failure would likely trigger escalation rather than retreat. Donnie's thumb hovered over the phone's keyboard, then began typing a response. Message delivered. Moving to phase 2. What are you doing? David asked. Buying us time to understand what we're really facing, Donnie replied. Whoever sent Rex isn't going to simply give up because one bully failed. They'll send someone else, probably someone more dangerous. He looked around the restaurant at the elderly patrons who had been so jubilant moments before, now understanding they were all potential targets in a campaign they didn't fully comprehend. Mrs. Liu clutched her purse tighter. Mr. Wang's hand trembled as he reached for his tea, and the birthday celebration had dissolved into worried murmurs as parents began calculating the risks of staying versus the humiliation of fleeing. Call the police, Donnie instructed David. But don't expect this to end with arrest reports and court dates. Whoever is behind this has resources, organization, and a long-term plan. One victory doesn't win a war. Harold's weathered hand found Donnie's shoulder, the old soldier's grip steady despite everything he had endured. In Vietnam, we learned that the enemy's first attack tells you everything about their strategy. They underestimated us tonight. They won't make that mistake. Again, another message appeared on Rex's phone, this one containing an address in the warehouse district and a time. Meet tonight. We need to discuss your failure. Donnie memorized the address, then looked around at the faces of people who had become his responsibility the moment he chose to stand up. This is bigger than one restaurant, bigger than one neighborhood. But we're going to find out exactly what we're fighting, and we're going to stop it. The golden dragon on the restaurant's wall seemed to watch over them with ancient eyes, a symbol of protection that would be tested in the hours to come. The morning sun streamed through Golden Dragon's windows as Donnie sat across from David. Chun, Linda, and elderly Mr. Chun, who had emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of traditional tea and almond cookies. The restaurant felt different in daylight, smaller somehow, more vulnerable, like a sanctuary whose walls had been revealed as thinner than anyone had imagined. Linda's notebook lay open between them, its pages filled with months of meticulous documentation that now read like a battle plan written by an unseen enemy. Her nursing school training and patient observation had served the community well, though none of them had realized it at the time. It started 6 months ago, Linda explained, pointing to her earliest entries. Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop on 38th Avenue. City inspector found code violations that had never existed before. When she couldn't afford the repairs, a buyer appeared within days offering cash, but only at 60% of market value. David translated for his father, whose weathered face grew increasingly grim as the pattern emerged. Mr. Chun had lived through the Cultural Revolution, had seen organized campaigns of displacement and persecution. His responses in Mandarin carried the weight of historical recognition. He says this is not random harassment, David translated. This is systematic removal. Someone is clearing the neighborhood building by building, business by business. Donnie studied the notebook's careful entries. Elderly customers harassed at the dry cleaner. Parking enforcement suddenly targeting specific streets where seniors lived. Health inspectors finding mysterious violations at restaurants that had operated without incident for decades. The methodology was sophisticated, patient, and ruthlessly effective. The landlord pressures, Linda continued, flipping to a section marked with red ink. Betty Nakamura, who owns our building, started asking about updating the tenant profile. 3 months ago, said younger demographics would be better for the neighborhood's future. When Dad refused to break our lease, she started finding problems with our permits. Mr. Chin spoke again, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who had survived one purge and recognized the signs of another. David's translation was halting, clearly struggling with concepts that had no direct English equivalent. He says, in China, they called it urban renewal, but the real purpose was removing undesirable populations. The methods are always the same: bureaucratic harassment, economic pressure, and when those fail. David's voice trailed off as the implication hung in the air. Physical intimidation. Donnie finished grimly, pulling out Rex's captured phone. Which brings us to last night. He scrolled through the messages again, cross-referencing phone numbers with Linda's documented incidents. The connections were undeniable. The same mysterious V had coordinated harassment across multiple locations, using different methods, but following a consistent strategy. 5 other restaurants have been targeted, Linda said, checking her notes. Ming Garden closed last month after their chef was attacked in the alley. Golden Lotus lost their liquor license over a technicality that their lawyer said was impossible. Happy Garden's elderly customers started getting tickets every time they parked nearby. A new message appeared on Rex's phone. Meet tonight. Warehouse District. Pier 47. We need to discuss your failure. Donnie memorized the address, then looked around the table at 3 generations of a family that had built their life around serving their community. This meeting isn't just about Rex's failure. Whoever is behind this is escalating. They're moving from economic pressure to direct violence. Mr. Chin's response needed no translation. The old man's eyes held the flat determination of someone who had faced systematic oppression before and survived it. What did he say? Donnie asked. David's translation was simple but profound. He says our family did not survive the cultural revolution to be driven from our home by American bullies. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Richmond district as Donnie made his way to the address he'd memorized from Harold and May's file. Their modest apartment building on 38th Avenue stood like a testament to immigrant perseverance, well-maintained despite its age, surrounded by the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors and watched out for each other. Harold answered the door using his walker, his face brightening with genuine surprise and pleasure. Despite everything that had happened, or perhaps because of it, the old veteran seemed energized, his military bearing more pronounced than it had been at the restaurant. Mr. Yan, Harold said, stepping aside to welcome him in. This is unexpected, but very welcome. I brought soup from Golden Dragon, Donnie said, holding up a container of pho. And your reading glasses. They were left behind during the excitement. May appeared from the kitchen, her face creased with concern that transformed into a warm smile when she saw their visitor. Come, come, she insisted in accented English, then switched to Vietnamese. Harold, make our hero comfortable. The apartment was small but immaculate, every surface reflecting decades of careful maintenance by people who understood the value of what they had earned. Family photographs covered one wall, children and grandchildren scattered across America, the visual record of a successful immigration story that had taken 50 years to write. Harold settled carefully into his chair, gesturing for Donnie to take the sofa. You saved our lives last night, he said simply. In Vietnam, we learned that such debts can never be fully repaid, only honored. You owe me nothing, Donnie replied, but Harold held up a weathered hand. Please, let me show you something. Harold reached for a photo album, his movements careful but determined. The pages he opened revealed faded color photographs from the Vietnam War. American soldiers posing with Vietnamese interpreters, jungle scenes, and faces too young for the uniforms they wore. "Here," Harold said, pointing to a photograph that made Donnie's breath catch. A young Vietnamese man in jungle fatigue stood next to an Asian American lieutenant, both smiling despite the evident stress of their circumstances. This was taken in 1969 near the Cambodian border. My unit was ambushed, surrounded for 3 days. Donnie stared at the photograph, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. The lieutenant was unmistakably his uncle, the same strong jaw, the same intelligent eyes, even the same way of standing with one shoulder slightly forward. Lieutenant Yin saved 15 men that day, Harold continued, his voice thick with memory. Called in air support, organized the evacuation, stayed behind to make sure everyone else got out first. I was the interpreter, helped coordinate with the helicopter crews. Without him, Harold's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Without Donnie's uncle, Harold would never have survived to immigrate to America, never would have built his family, never would have become part of the community that Donnie had chosen to protect. "He visited you?" Donnie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. May nodded, bringing tea and settling beside her husband. "2 years ago. Nice young man. Your nephew," he said. "Works in movies now." His uncle always talked about the Vietnamese translator who helped them escape, who saved American lives when he could have run. Harold opened another page of the album, revealing a more recent photograph. Harold and May with a man who could have been Donnie's twin, all three smiling on the steps of Golden Dragon Restaurant. He said his uncle never forgot Vietnam, never forgot the people who helped him when help meant the difference between life and death. Harold's eyes met Donnie's with the steady gaze of one warrior recognizing another. He said his uncle always believed that some debts pass from generation to generation, that family honor means remembering who stood with you when standing was dangerous. The weight of family obligation, of inherited debt and inherited honor, settled on Donnie's shoulders like an old familiar coat. This wasn't just about protecting a community anymore. This was about honoring a connection that stretched back 50 years, about completing a circle that his uncle had started in a jungle on the other side of the world. "Your uncle would be proud," Harold said quietly, "to know his nephew carries on the family tradition of protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Donnie studied the photograph of his uncle, seeing in that young lieutenant's face the same sense of duty that had driven him to stand up in a restaurant the night before. The circle was complete, and the debt was now his to honor. Friday evening settled over the warehouse district like a shroud, transforming the industrial landscape into a maze of shadows and empty loading docks. Donnie sat in his rented Honda Civic across from Pier 47, watching through his camera's telephoto lens as Rex Kowalski's beat-up Mustang pulled into the empty lot. Rex emerged from his car like a wounded animal, his movements still pained from their encounter at Golden Dragon. Danny and Mike flanked him, both clearly reluctant participants in whatever was about to unfold. Danny's nervous energy had intensified, while Mike kept flexing his hands, still dealing with residual numbness from Donnie's nerve strike. The warehouse itself was a monument to San Francisco's industrial past, corrugated steel walls streaked with rust, loading bays that had once served the fishing fleet, windows too grimy to see through. Now it served as a meeting place for whatever organization had been systematically terrorizing the Richmond district's elderly population. At precisely 9 o'clock, a black BMW sedan glided into the lot, its pristine condition a stark contrast to the industrial decay surrounding it. The man who emerged commanded attention through sheer presence. Expensive suit, silver hair, the kind of confident bearing that came from years of getting his way through a combination of money and intimidation. Victor Kozlov, Donnie realized, watching through his camera as the man approached Rex with the predatory stride of someone accustomed to being feared. This had to be the mysterious V from the text messages, the architect of the campaign against Harold and May's community. "You fucked up," Kozlov's voice carried clearly across the empty lot, his accent revealing Eastern European origins. "One old couple, 3 against 1, and you come back looking like you lost a fight with a meat grinder." Rex's response was barely audible, but his body language screamed humiliation and fear. The tough guy who had terrorized elderly diners was reduced to a cowering subordinate in the presence of his actual boss. Donnie adjusted his camera settings, capturing faces and license plates while recording the conversation on his phone. Evidence would be crucial if this escalated beyond what he could handle alone, and every instinct told him that Kozlov represented something far more dangerous than simple real estate harassment. The old man had help, Rex said, loud enough for Donnie to catch the words. Some kung fu asshole who got lucky. Kung fu asshole. Kozlov's laugh was sharp and cruel. You were beaten by one middle-aged Asian man, and you're making excuses? What did I tell you about excuses, Rex? The backhand that followed was casual, almost dismissive, but it sent Rex stumbling backward into his car. Danny and Mike shifted, nervously, clearly recognizing the signs of escalating violence from someone far more dangerous than their usual target demographic. Here's what's going to happen, Kozlov continued, pulling out a manila envelope from his car. Phase 2. No more subtle harassment, no more economic pressure. These people need to understand that cooperation isn't optional. He handed Rex a sheet of paper that, even from a distance, Donnie could see contained a list of addresses. The FAM's building was probably on there, along with Golden Dragon and other businesses that had refused to capitulate to the pressure campaign. Make them understand they're not welcome, Kozlov said. Use whatever methods necessary. The permits are already arranged, the inspection scheduled. We just need the current occupants motivated to leave. What if they call the cops? Danny asked, his voice cracking with nervous energy. Kozlov's smile was predatory. Half the precinct is on my payroll, kid. The other half doesn't care what happens to a bunch of immigrants who can't vote anyway. This is business, nothing personal. But Donnie could see it was personal for Kozlov. The way he talked about the elderly residents, the contempt in his voice when he discussed their presence in his neighborhood, the casual cruelty that suggested someone who enjoyed the process of displacement as much as the profit it generated. As the meeting continued, more details emerged. Properties acquired below market value after harassment campaigns, construction permits fast-tracked through corrupt officials, luxury condos marketed to tech workers who had no idea their future homes were built on systematic cruelty. Donnie's phone buzzed with an incoming text. Rex was trying to respond to Kozlov's earlier messages, unaware his phone was missing. The delay would buy some time, but not much. The meeting was breaking up now, Kozlov returning to his BMW while Rex and his crew climbed back into their Mustang. But as Donnie prepared to follow Kozlov, headlights suddenly blazed in his rearview. Mirror point two black SUVs had boxed him in while he was focused on the meeting. He had been so concerned with watching the predators that he had missed their hunters. Donnie's hands moved to the ignition as tactical options flashed through his mind. With the speed of decades of combat training, the Honda's engine turned over smoothly, but the positioning of the SUVs left him only one viable escape route: a narrow gap between loading dock and chain-link fence that would require precision driving and considerable luck. His phone buzzed, with Rex's continued attempts to contact his missing device, providing an unwitting countdown to discovery. Once Kozlov realized his field operative wasn't responding, the mysterious V would know someone had been monitoring their operation. The lead SUV's driver door opened, and a man emerged who looked nothing like Rex's amateur crew. Military bearing, tactical clothing, the kind of careful movement that suggested professional training rather than street fighting experience. This was escalation on a scale that transformed the situation from community harassment to something approaching urban warfare. Donnie reversed hard, his rear bumper catching the trailing SUV's front quarter panel with a grinding crash of metal and plastic. The Honda's smaller size became an advantage as he whipped the steering wheel left, executing a precision reverse turn that would have impressed his stunt driving coordinators. The narrow gap between buildings became his salvation, as the larger SUVs struggled to follow, their width disadvantage buying him precious seconds. Behind him, he could hear the distinctive sound of professional voices coordinating pursuit, not the angry shouting of street thugs, but the calm efficiency of operators accustomed to this kind of work. His phone rang as he navigated the industrial maze, Rex's name appearing on the screen. Donnie answered while taking a hard right turn that sent his tires squealing against the asphalt. Where the fuck is my phone? Rex's voice was tight with panic and barely controlled rage. You dropped it at Golden Dragon. Donnie replied calmly, even as his rearview mirror filled with approaching headlights. I thought you might want it back. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before Rex began screaming threats and profanity that would have impressed a drill sergeant. But beneath the bluster, Donnie could hear genuine fear. Rex understood better than anyone what Kozlov would do to subordinates who compromised operations. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, Rex said when his initial fury exhausted itself. Kozlov isn't some neighborhood tough guy. He's connected, protected, and he doesn't leave loose ends. Like Harold and May Pham? Donnie asked, taking another turn that led him toward the brighter lights of the main thoroughfares. Like all the other elderly people your boss has been systematically terrorizing. Those people are obstacles to progress, Rex replied, but his voice lacked conviction. The neighborhood is changing whether they like it or not. Kozlov is just helping the process along. Donnie could hear voices in the background of Rex's call. Kozlov demanding updates. Other men coordinating search patterns. The scope of resources being deployed to recover one dropped phone suggested an organization with significant backing and serious concerns about exposure. Meet me, Donnie said, making a decision that his tactical mind warned against, but his warrior's honor demanded. Pier 19, 1 hour. Come alone, and I'll return your phone. Are you insane? Kozlov will kill you anyway if this investigation leads back to him. Donnie interrupted. Your only chance is to help me shut down his operation before he decides you're too much of a liability to keep around. The line went dead, but Donnie knew Rex would come. Desperation made men predictable, and Rex was clearly desperate enough to consider options that would have seemed impossible yesterday. His pursuit had fallen behind in the maze of industrial streets, but Donnie knew they would regroup quickly. Professional operators didn't give up because their target temporarily escaped. They adapted, called for reinforcements, and methodically closed the net until escape became impossible. Pier 19 would be dangerous, potentially a trap, certainly. A risk that his logical mind counseled against. But Harold Pham's photograph haunted him, the young Vietnamese interpreter who had risked everything to save American soldiers, including Donnie's uncle. Some debts transcended personal safety, and some circles demanded completion regardless of the cost. The city lights reflected off the bay as Donnie drove toward what might be his last chance to prevent Kozlov's campaign from escalating beyond harassment to something far more deadly. Behind him, unmarked vehicles began coordinating through radio traffic that spoke of professional patience and unlimited resources. The war for the Richmond District Soul was about to begin in earnest. The chase began in earnest as Donnie's Honda emerged from the industrial maze onto the better-lit streets of the Embarcadero. Behind him, the black SUVs had been joined by 2 more vehicles, a coordinated pursuit that spoke of professional training and unlimited resources. Kozlov's operation was far more sophisticated than simple real estate harassment. That Donnie's phone buzzed with an incoming call from David Chun. The restaurant is surrounded. David's voice was tight with controlled panic. 4 cars, men in suits. They're not police. Get everyone out the back, Donnie instructed, taking a hard left that sent his tires screaming against the pavement. Call Harold and May. Tell them to leave their apartment immediately. This is no longer about harassment. It's about elimination. His rearview mirror filled with the approaching headlights of his pursuers, their formation tight and professional. These weren't street thugs hired for intimidation. They were specialists brought in to contain a situation that had spiraled beyond Kozlov's initial parameters. The narrow streets of Chinatown became Donnie's ally as he wove between parked cars and late-night pedestrians, his smaller vehicle able to navigate spaces the SUVs couldn't follow. Years of stunt driving combined with intimate knowledge of San Francisco's geography gave him advantages his pursuers couldn't match. But advantages weren't the same as escape, and Donnie knew the net was tightening with each passing minute. His phone rang again. Rex, his voice now edged with genuine terror. Kozlov knows you have the phone. He's mobilizing everything. Cops, private security, even some federal contacts. You need to disappear, man. Like, right fucking now. What about the community? Donnie asked, taking another sharp turn that sent his Honda skidding sideways before regaining traction. What happens to Harold and May and all the other people? Kozlov wants gone. They're collateral damage in a war you can't win, Rex replied. Kozlov has been planning this for 3 years. He owns judges, cops, city inspectors. You're one guy with martial arts skills against an organization that specializes in making problems disappear. Donnie could hear the truth in Rex's voice, but also the resignation of someone who had given up fighting for anything beyond his own survival. Where are you now? Hiding in my apartment, wondering how long before Kozlov decides I'm too much of a liability to keep breathing. Rex's laugh held no humor. Turns out there's a big difference between beating up old people and facing real consequences. The Embarcadero opened up before Donnie, the bay's dark water reflecting the city lights like scattered stars. Behind him, his pursuers had multiplied again, at least 6 vehicles now, their headlights creating a constellation of menace in his mirrors. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda Chun. Dad's safe. Mr. Chin refuses to leave restaurant. Says dragons don't abandon their lairs. Another message followed immediately. Harold and May missing from apartment. Door was open, signs of struggle. The words hit Donnie like a physical blow. While he had been playing cat and mouse with Kozlov's hunters, the real prey had been captured. Harold and May, the elderly couple whose dignity had started this entire confrontation, were now in the hands of an organization that viewed human life as an accounting problem. His pursuit vehicles were closing in, but Donnie made a decision that his tactical mind screamed against. Instead of continuing his flight toward relative safety, he executed a brutal U-turn that sent his Honda careening across 3 lanes of traffic. He was done running. Harold and May needed rescuing, and every minute of delay increased the danger they faced. The chase had become a hunt, and Donnie Yen was no longer the prey. Golden Dragon Restaurant had become a fortress under siege when Donnie arrived, abandoning his damaged Honda 3 blocks away and approaching on foot through the network of alleys that connected Chinatown's hidden arteries. The 4 black sedans parked outside weren't bothering with subtlety. This was a show of force designed to send a message to the entire community. Through the restaurant's front windows, Donnie could see armed men in expensive suits positioning themselves with military precision. But the real threat assessment came from what he couldn't see: the professional calm of their movements, the way they communicated through earpieces rather than shouted commands, the casual competence that marked them as far more dangerous than Rex's amateur crew. His phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Golden Dragon Restaurant. 1 hour. Come alone or the old couple dies. V. The message was accompanied by a photograph that made Donnie's blood run cold. Harold and May bound to chairs in what appeared to be an industrial setting, their faces showing fear, but also the stubborn dignity of people who had survived worse than this and refused to be broken by criminals. David Chun emerged from the restaurant's rear exit, moving with the careful stealth of someone who understood they were being hunted. He spotted Donnie in the alley's shadows and approached with the mixture of relief and desperation that comes from having nowhere else to turn. They have staff members inside, David whispered. Linda, 3 of the kitchen workers, 2 elderly. Customers who wouldn't leave. They're not hostages exactly, but they're not free to go either. What about your father? David's expression mixed admiration with exasperation. He's barricaded in the kitchen with 2 cleavers and a rolling pin, daring them to try to remove him. Says the Golden Dragon has protected this community for 30 years and won't stop now. Through the restaurant's back window, Donnie could see the standoff. Mr. Chin positioned behind the stainless steel prep counter like a general defending his command post, while suited men maintained careful distance from the old cook's razor-sharp cleavers. Neither side wanted to escalate to actual violence, but both were committed to their positions. This is about more than harassment now, Donnie said, studying the tactical situation. Kozlov is using your restaurant as bait to draw me in, but he's also making a statement. Any community that resists gets turned into an example. Linda Chun appeared at her grandfather's side in the kitchen, her nursing student training evident in how she checked on the elderly customers while staying clear of the armed men. Even in captivity, she was still trying to take care of people. Donnie's phone buzzed again. 55 minutes. Every minute you delay, someone gets hurt. Starting with the old war hero. The accompanying photo showed Harold with a fresh bruise on his cheek, May trying to comfort him despite her own restraints. The message was clear. Kozlov would escalate the violence incrementally until Donnie surrendered himself. "I need to get inside," Donnie said, but David grabbed his arm. "It's a trap. Even if you save everyone here, Kozlov still has Harold and May. You can't be in two places at once." "No," Donnie agreed. "But I can make Kozlov choose which battle he wants to fight." He pulled out Rex's captured phone and began typing a message to Kozlov's number. "Have police heading to your warehouse location. Either release everyone now or explain kidnapping charges to federal investigators." The bluff was desperate and probably transparent, but it might buy precious minutes while Kozlov verified the threat. Every criminal organization, no matter how well-connected, had limits to what they could smooth over with corrupt officials. That David's phone rang. Linda calling from inside the restaurant. "Grandpa wants to know if the legendary Donnie Yen is really outside," she whispered. "He says if you are, he's ready to help however he can." Through the window, they could see Mr. Chen looking directly at them, his weathered face creased with determination. The old cook had recognized the moment when hiding became impossible and action became necessary. "Tell him," Donnie said, "that legends are just people who refuse to quit when quitting makes sense." He began moving toward the restaurant's front entrance, knowing it was almost certainly suicide but understanding that some battles had to be fought regardless of odds. Behind him, David Chen followed, abandoning safety for the slim chance of saving his family and community, the Golden Dragons. Front door chimed with deceptive normalcy as Donnie walked into what was clearly a professional ambush. 6 armed men in tactical positions, sightlines calculated, exits covered. The kind of setup that turned restaurants into kill zones with minimal effort and maximum efficiency. The leader, a granite-faced man with the bearing of ex-military contractor, spoke into his earpiece. Target acquired. Proceeding as planned. But Donnie had spent decades reading rooms and opponents, and something was wrong with this picture. The positioning was too perfect, too obvious, like a textbook demonstration rather than an actual combat situation. These men were professionals, but they were performing for an audience rather than executing a mission. "Mr. Yen," the leader said, with mock courtesy, "thank you for making this simple. Mr. Kozlov will be pleased to meet you personally." In the kitchen, Mr. Chun continued his standoff with 2 more operatives, his cleavers gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Linda knelt beside elderly Mrs. Liu and Mr. Wong, both too frightened to move but too stubborn to abandon their weekly dinner routine. The tableau was designed for maximum psychological impact. Innocent people threatened by professional violence. "Where are Harold and May?" Donnie asked, his voice carrying the controlled calm that preceded explosive action. "Safe, for now," the leader replied. "But their continued safety depends entirely on your cooperation." Donnie's phone buzzed with another message from Kozlov. "Warehouse District, Pier 47. You have 30 minutes to arrive alone. Every minute. Late costs someone a finger." The message was accompanied by a live video feed showing Harold and May in what appeared to be a shipping container, their restraints now including hoods that eliminated their ability to see their surroundings. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and deeply personal. "You see," the leader continued, "Mr. Kozlov believes in efficiency. One problem, one solution. You disappear, and everyone else gets to continue their lives in the new neighborhood. Order." But David Chun had been right about one thing. Donnie couldn't be in 2 places at once. Saving the restaurant staff meant abandoning Harold and May. Rescuing the elderly couple meant leaving his newfound community defenseless against professional killers. The calculation was impossible, which meant the game was rigged from the beginning. "Linda," Donnie called toward the kitchen, his voice carrying clearly despite the armed men between them. "What's the first rule of triage?" Her response came immediately, nursing school training overriding fear. "Save who you can save. Don't let perfect be the enemy of possible." The armed men exchanged glances, unclear about the significance of the exchange, but recognizing some form of communication they hadn't anticipated. "Mr. Chun," Donnie continued, "what's the most important ingredient in any recipe?" The old cook's reply carried the weight of traditional wisdom. "Timing. Everything depends on perfect timing." The leader's patience snapped. "Enough games. You're coming with us now, or people start dying." But Donnie had been buying time for more than conversation. Through the restaurant's windows, he could see movement. In the shadows, Not more of Kozlov's men, but familiar faces from the neighborhood. Rex Kowalski stood across the street, his usual swagger replaced by grim determination. Behind him, other figures moved with purpose. David Chun had made more calls than Donnie had realized. "You're right about timing," Donnie said, his stance shifting subtly as his body prepared for action. "But you're wrong about who controls it." Rex's voice boomed from the street. "SFPD. Building is surrounded." It wasn't true, but the bluff created exactly the confusion Donnie needed. The armed men hesitated for a crucial half-second, torn between maintaining their positions and responding to an external threat. In that moment of uncertainty, Donnie moved. The leader's weapon was rising when Donnie's palm strike caught him in the solar plexus, doubling him over and sending his gun clattering across the floor. A spinning heel kick dropped the second man before he could draw, while a precise nerve strike left the third reaching for a weapon that suddenly seemed impossibly heavy. But 6 opponents meant 6 different attack angles, and even Donnie Yen couldn't be everywhere at once. The restaurant erupted into choreographed chaos as the remaining 3 operatives opened fire, their suppressed weapons spitting death across the dining room, while Donnie used overturned tables and the restaurant's structural pillars for cover. Ceramic bowls exploded into fragments, steam rose from shattered soup pots, and the peaceful sanctuary of Golden Dragon transformed into an urban battlefield. Mr. Chen's war cry echoed from the kitchen as the elderly cook charged his captors with cleaver in each hand, decades of muscle memory from his youth in China overriding his 78-year-old body's limitations. One operative went down screaming, clutching a severed wrist, while Linda tackled the second with textbook nursing school technique. Pressure points learned for healing turned toward incapacitation through the restaurant's shattered front windows. Rex Kowalski and a motley crew of neighborhood residents pressed their improvised assault. Danny and Mike flanked their former leader. Their earlier humiliation transformed into desperate courage. Behind them came faces Donnie recognized from Harold's veteran network, elderly men moving with military precision despite walkers and canes, their combat training asserting itself through arthritis and age. "This is insane," the remaining operative leader shouted into his earpiece, taking cover behind an overturned table as Donnie systematically dismantled his team. "We're fighting half the neighborhood." But Kozlov's voice crackled back with cold fury. "Complete the mission or don't come back. The warehouse is already prepared for Phase 3. Donnie understood the implication immediately. Harold and May weren't just hostages. They were the opening move in something far more devastating. Every minute spent fighting in the restaurant was a minute Kozlov could use to implement whatever Phase 3 entailed. His phone buzzed with another message, this one a video call that connected automatically. Kozlov's face filled the screen, his expensive suit and polished appearance a stark contrast to the industrial background behind him. "Impressive, Mr. Yen," Kozlov said, his voice carrying clearly despite the gunfire. "But while you're playing action hero with my expendable assets, your elderly friends are learning about the price of resistance." The camera panned to show Harold and May, now suspended from chains in what appeared to be a meat processing facility. Industrial hooks, concrete floors stained with decades of use, the kind of place where people could disappear without leaving forensic evidence. "You have 15 minutes to reach Pier 47, Kozlov continued. "Come alone, or I demonstrate exactly what happens to communities that refuse to cooperate with urban renewal." Behind Kozlov, Donnie could see other figures, bound forms that suggested Harold and May weren't the only captives. The scope was larger than one elderly couple, larger than one restaurant, larger than anything Donnie had initially comprehended. "You're not just displacing residents," Donnie realized aloud, still ducking automatic weapons fire. "You're trafficking them." Kozlov's smile was predatory. "Elderly immigrants make excellent workers. Docile, desperate, and easily controlled through threats to family members. The construction industry has an endless appetite for cheap labor, and my clients prefer workers who won't complain to authorities." The revelation transformed everything. This wasn't gentrification, it was systematic enslavement disguised as urban development. Rex appeared at Donnie's shoulder, having fought his way through the restaurant's chaos. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, staring at the phone screen. I thought we were just scaring people into moving. This is what you were always part of, Donnie replied grimly. You just chose not to see it. The last two operatives had barricaded themselves behind the restaurant's service counter, their ammunition running low but their position still defensible. Outside, police sirens finally began to wail in the distance, real law enforcement responding to reports of gunfire, not Rex's desperate bluff. They'll destroy the evidence before police arrive, Rex said, his voice thick with self-loathing. Kozlov has protocols for this. Clean up, burn down, disappear. Donnie looked around the restaurant at the community that had rallied to defend itself. Mr. Chun brandishing his cleavers like an ancient warrior, Linda coordinating care for wounded neighbors, elderly veterans coordinating tactical positions, with the precision of soldiers who had never forgotten their training. Not this time, Donnie said, making a decision that would either save everyone or destroy them all. This time we end it. The war for the Richmond district had escalated from harassment to human trafficking, and only complete victory would ensure the community's survival. Donnie regained consciousness in a concrete room that reeked of industrial chemicals and human misery. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, secured to a metal chair that had been bolted to the floor with professional thoroughness. Through a grimy window, he could see the San Francisco Bay and the skeletal remains of loading cranes. Pier 47, exactly where Kozlov had promised. The warehouse around him told a story of systematic horror. Dozens of metal cages lined the walls, each containing elderly figures huddled in thin blankets. Some faces were familiar from the Richmond district. Mr. Kim from the grocery store who had disappeared 3 months ago, Mrs. Chun from the flower shop. Others he recognized from community gatherings that now seemed like memories from another lifetime. Harold and May occupied a cage near the center of the room, their dignity intact despite plastic restraints and the bruises that marked Kozlov's interrogation techniques. Harold's military bearing remained unbroken, his eyes alert and calculating as he assessed their surroundings with the tactical awareness of someone who had survived captivity before. "You're awake," Harold called softly when he noticed Donnie stirring. "They've been waiting for you to recover." The man in the expensive suit has questions. Around the warehouse, Donnie could see the full scope of Kozlov's operation. Industrial equipment designed for processing, loading bays that connected to shipping containers, office spaces that coordinated human cargo like any other commodity. This wasn't a hastily assembled kidnapping operation. It was a sophisticated trafficking hub that had been operating for years. Guard rotations followed military patterns, suggesting ex-military or police backgrounds for Kozlov's security team. Cameras covered every angle, communication equipment coordinated with external networks, and the entire facility was designed for rapid evacuation if authorities approached. But Donnie's martial arts training had included more than combat techniques. 47 years of discipline had taught him meditation, internal energy cultivation, and the kind of flexibility that turned restraints into temporary inconveniences rather than permanent problems. He began working on the zip ties with techniques that combined yoga flexibility with precise joint manipulation, movements so subtle they appeared to be normal shifting in his chair. The plastic restraints were professional grade, but they had been applied by someone who assumed their prisoner was an ordinary citizen rather than someone whose body had been trained as a weapon since childhood. "Your friends at the restaurant put up quite a fight," Harold said, his voice carrying the approval of one warrior recognizing others. "The old cook especially. I haven't seen Cleaver work like that since Saigon in '68. May's voice joined her husband's, her words carefully chosen to appear like casual conversation while actually providing tactical intelligence. "The guards change every 4 hours. 6 men during day shift, 4 at night. The loading bays connect to 3 different routes out of the warehouse district." Through their seemingly innocent chatter, the elderly couple was providing Donnie with everything he needed to plan an escape. Guard patterns, facility layout, external access points, even the locations of emergency equipment and communications gear. These weren't helpless victims waiting for rescue. They were veteran survivors who had learned to gather intelligence and maintain hope in the face of systematic oppression. The zip ties finally gave way to Donnie's careful manipulation, but he kept his hands positioned as if still restrained. Around the warehouse, 43 elderly prisoners watched with the quiet attention of people who understood that their survival might depend on what happened in the next few minutes. Freedom was just the first step. Now came the hard part, getting everyone out alive. Rex Kowalski sat in his beat-up Mustang outside San Francisco General Hospital, staring at the building where his victims had been taken for treatment after the Golden Dragon battle. The irony wasn't lost on him. The people he had terrorized were now the ones whose forgiveness he desperately needed. The local news played on his phone. Coordinated attack on Chinatown restaurant leaves 6 injured, suspects still at large. Security footage showed him clearly, fighting alongside the very community he had been hired to destroy. By tomorrow, Kozlov would know about his betrayal, and Rex understood exactly what happened to liabilities in this organization. His hands shook as he scrolled through text messages from Donnie and Mike, both hiding in different parts of the city, all of them waiting for the inevitable retaliation. But beneath his fear was something Rex hadn't felt in years, the possibility of redemption earned through action rather than words. Mei Fam's voice echoed in his memory. "Why did you hurt us?" Not anger, not hatred, just profound sadness from someone who genuinely couldn't understand how another human being could choose cruelty over compassion. The hospital's automatic doors opened to reveal Linda Chen emerging with her arm in a sling, her nursing school friends flanking her protectively. Rex expected them to flee when they saw him, but Linda approached his car with the fearless determination of someone who had already faced worse than an ex-MMA fighter having a crisis of conscience. "You're Rex," she said through his rolled-down window. "Dad told me you helped fight them off." "I helped create the problem in the first place," Rex replied, unable to meet her eyes. 3 months of terrorizing your customers, threatening your family, destroying everything your grandfather built. But you chose differently when it mattered, Linda said. Grandpa says redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about earning the right to a different future. Her words hit harder than any punch Rex had ever taken. This young woman, whose family he had threatened and whose community he had terrorized, was offering him something he didn't deserve but desperately needed. The chance to be better than his worst actions. "Kozlov has Donnie Yen," Rex said, the words spilling out like a confession. "Warehouse District, Pier 47. But it's not just him. It's dozens of people from the neighborhood. Elderly folks who got grabbed when they wouldn't sell their homes. Or businesses." Linda's expression shifted from compassion to fierce determination. "How many guards? What kind of security?" "You can't be thinking of mounting a rescue," Rex said. But even as he spoke, he could see the tactical wheels turning behind her eyes. "These aren't the amateurs who hit your restaurant. Kozlov's core team are ex-military, ex-police, professionals who specialize in making problems disappear. So were the Viet Cong," Linda replied with a slight smile. "But Harold's generation figured out how to beat them." As if summoned by her words, elderly figures began emerging from the hospital and surrounding areas. Veterans from Harold's network, community leaders from the restaurant battle, neighbors who had heard the news and understood that their survival depended on collective action rather than individual safety. Damar Chen appeared at Linda's shoulder, his weathered hands still bearing cuts from cleaver work, but his eyes bright with purpose. His rapid Mandarin needed no translation. This was a man who had survived systematic oppression before and refused to be defeated by American criminals. "He says," Linda translated, "that his generation didn't escape the Cultural Revolution to be enslaved by capitalist bullies." Rex found himself surrounded by the very people he had been hired to intimidate. Elderly immigrants, young professionals, restaurant workers, veterans whose medals meant more than his trophies ever had. But instead of the fear he expected to see, their faces showed the grim determination of people who had decided that retreat was no longer an option. "You know the layout," Linda said. "You know their security protocols. Help us get our people back, and maybe you start earning that second chance Grandpa thinks you deserve." Rex looked around at faces that should have been filled with hatred but instead showed cautious hope. These people were offering him something no victory in the ring had ever provided, the chance to be a protector instead of a predator. "Kozlov will kill me when this is over," Rex said. "Then we better make sure he doesn't survive to try," Linda replied with the kind of steel her grandfather would have been proud of. The rescue operation that assembled in Golden Dragon's damaged dining room looked less like a military mission and more like a neighborhood potluck planned by people who had watched too many action movies. But beneath the apparent chaos, Linda Chen recognized the same organizational principles her nursing instructors taught for mass casualty events: triage, delegation, and making the best possible decisions with inadequate resources. Harold's veteran network had provided tactical expertise that turned elderly community members into a surprisingly effective strike force. Mr. Patterson, 74 and confined to a wheelchair since losing his legs in Vietnam, had become their intelligence coordinator, using his contacts at the Veterans Administration to access building plans for the warehouse district. Pier 47 was built in 1943 for the war effort, Patterson explained, his maps spread across a table still scarred by bullet holes. 3 loading bays, 2 emergency exits, 1 main electrical junction that controls the entire facility. Rex stood at the table's edge, his usual swagger replaced by the careful attention of someone who understood his life depended on the success of this operation. Kozlov's got 12 men total, he said. 6 on patrol, for stationed at key points, 2 in the office monitoring communications. Plus whatever backup he can call in, Danny Walsh added from his position by the door. The younger man had traded his criminal swagger for the nervous energy of someone who had seen too much and wanted desperately to undo some of the damage. Linda coordinated the medical aspects with her nursing school classmates, turning the restaurant's backroom into a triage station. We're assuming multiple gunshot wounds, possible hypothermia from the warehouse conditions, and psychological trauma from however long they've been held captive. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Liu, the elderly customer who had been dining at Golden Dragon during the initial confrontation. At 81, she moved slowly and spoke softly, but her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had survived the Cultural Revolution by learning to see what others missed. I recognize that warehouse, she said in Mandarin, her words translated by Linda. My late husband worked there in the 1970s, before it was abandoned. There are tunnels, old service passages that connect to the storm drain system. Rex's expression shifted from skepticism to hope. You're talking about a way in that bypasses all their security? Mrs. Liu nodded, pulling out a photograph from her purse that showed her husband in work clothes standing in front of the same warehouse. He helped build those passages for the original owners. Said they were designed to move cargo during dock strikes, but they would work just as well for other purposes. The tactical picture suddenly transformed. Instead of a frontal assault against professional killers in a fortified position, they could mount a surprise attack through routes Kozlov's team couldn't possibly know about. Timeline. Mr. Chen asked through Linda's translation. Rex checked his phone, noting the increasing urgency in Kozlov's unanswered messages. He's planning to move the operation tonight. Something about a ship arriving at 3 a.m. to take the cargo overseas. The word cargo hung in the air like a curse. Everyone in the room understood they were talking about human beings, elderly community members who would disappear forever if this rescue failed. 2 hours to plan, organize, and execute, Linda said, her nursing training translating seamlessly to military logistics. Multiple simultaneous objectives: rescue the hostages, capture Kozlov, and document everything for evidence. But as the planning intensified, Rex's phone buzzed with an incoming call that made everyone freeze. Kozlov's name appeared on the screen, and the ringtone seemed impossibly loud in the restaurant's tense silence. Answer it, Linda said. Find out what he knows. Rex's hand trembled as he accepted the call, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear Kozlov's cold voice fill the room. I know you're planning something stupid, Kozlov said without preamble. But here's what you don't know. I have contacts in the Coast Guard, the Harbor Patrol, and half the SFPD. Whatever amateur rescue mission you're contemplating will end with everyone you care about at the bottom of the bay. The threat was delivered with the casual certainty of someone who had made similar promises before and followed through on them. Last chance, Rex, Kozlov continued. Bring me Donnie Yin's body, or I start killing hostages one by one until someone more competent takes your place. The line went dead, leaving the room in silence that stretched until Mrs. Liu spoke again in Mandarin. What did she say? Rex asked. Linda's translation carried the weight of generational wisdom. She says that bullies always make the same mistake. They assume their victims will stay victims forever. Donnie's escape from his restraints had gone unnoticed for precisely 17 minutes, time he had used to study guard patterns, identify weak points in the warehouse's security, and count the exact number of prisoners who would need evacuation. 43 elderly individuals, most showing signs of prolonged captivity, but maintaining the stubborn dignity that had made them targets in the first place. The facility's layout revealed Kozlov's sophisticated operation, processing areas where victims were documented and prepared for transportation, holding cells that could accommodate different group sizes, and loading bays designed for rapid cargo movement. This wasn't hastily assembled kidnapping. It was industrial-scale human trafficking with the efficiency of a legitimate business. His martial arts stealth training served him well as he moved through the warehouse's shadows, neutralizing guards, with silent takedowns that left them unconscious but alive. Each victory brought him closer to the facility's control room, where Kozlov coordinated his operation with the casual professionalism of someone running a successful enterprise. "Sir," a guard's voice crackled through the radio system. "We've lost contact with perimeter teams 3 and 4. Kozlov's response carried no surprise, only cold calculation. Anticipated. Mr. Yin is more resourceful than his previous film suggested. Initiate lockdown protocol and prepare for extraction." Through the control room's windows, Donnie could see Kozlov's contingency plan unfolding. Armed guards moving toward the prisoner-holding area, vehicles positioning for rapid evacuation, and most ominously, industrial equipment being prepared for what could only be evidence destruction. His phone vibrated with an incoming text from Linda Chun. "Tunnel entrance located. Rescue team ready. Need 20 minutes. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours if Kozlov initiated his evidence destruction protocol. Donnie understood the brutal mathematics of the situation. Kozlov would eliminate the witnesses before abandoning the facility, leaving behind nothing but industrial chemicals and an empty warehouse. The control room door was reinforced steel, with electronic locks, but 47 years of martial arts training had included more than combat techniques. Lock picking, infiltration, and silent movement were all part of the discipline that separated true masters from athletic performers. Inside, Kozlov directed his operation with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis management. 2. Technicians worked at computer stations, deleting files and wiping hard drives with systematic thoroughness. A third man monitored radio communications, coordinating the facility's evacuation with military precision. "Status report." Kozlov spoke into his headset. "How long for complete sterilization?" 15 minutes for data destruction, one technician replied. 25 for chemical processing of organic evidence. Donnie understood the euphemism immediately. Organic evidence meant the prisoners, elderly community members who would be dissolved in industrial acid before authorities could document their disappearance. His approach through the control room's ventilation system had taken 8 minutes, leaving him with perhaps 7 minutes before Kozlov's final protocol began. The mathematics were impossibly tight, but Donnie had learned long ago that impossible odds simply meant conventional solutions wouldn't work. The ventilation grate above Kozlov's command station opened silently, and Donnie dropped into the room, like a shadow given form. His landing was perfectly silent, his movements so fluid that the first technician didn't realize death had entered the room until Donnie's pressure point strike sent him into unconsciousness. The second technician spun toward the disturbance and found himself facing a legend whose reputation had been built on precisely this kind of impossible situation. His hand moved toward the alarm button, but Donnie's interception was faster than conscious thought. Kozlov turned from his radio communication to find his control room under siege by a single man who moved like violence itself, dismantling his operation with surgical precision and terrifying efficiency. "Impressive," Kozlov said, his hand moving slowly toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "But you're still one man against an organization that spans 3 states and 2 countries." "Today," Donnie replied, his voice carrying the absolute calm that preceded devastating action. "That's enough." The final confrontation was about to begin, with 43 lives hanging in the balance and time running out for everyone involved. Kozlov's hand moved toward his concealed weapon, but Donnie's Wing Chun chain punch shattered his wrist before the gun cleared leather. An elbow strike sent the crime boss crashing through his monitor bank in a shower of sparks and broken glass. "This ends nothing," Kozlov gasped, blood streaming from his nose. "I have partners, backup operations." Donnie was already at the control panel, fingers flying across switches. Throughout the warehouse, 43 cage doors clicked open simultaneously. Harold's voice echoed through the facility. "Americans, follow my voice to freedom." Outside, sirens wailed as Coast Guard cutters surrounded Kozlov's escaped ship. 3 years of trafficking operations crumbled in minutes. Kozlov's remaining men opened fire as federal agents stormed the warehouse, choosing desperate violence over surrender. Donnie moved through the chaos like controlled lightning, each strike precise and devastating. Pressure points inducing unconsciousness, joint locks rendering weapons useless. Rex fought beside him with redemptive fury, his MMA skills finally protecting instead of terrorizing. Linda coordinated evacuations with clinical efficiency, while Harold helped weaker prisoners despite his own injuries. "This was just one operation," Kozlov snarled as agents restrained him. "There are bigger ones with protection you can't imagine." Donnie knelt beside the defeated trafficker. "Every operation has the same weakness. It depends on victims staying silent and communities staying divided." Dawn broke over San Francisco Bay, illuminating victory. San Francisco General's waiting room became an impromptu reunion center as families embraced loved ones missing for months. Harold sat in his wheelchair, injured but triumphant, watching elderly victims receive medical care surrounded by families who never stopped searching. Rex stood uncertainly near the entrance until May Pham called softly, "Mr. Rex, sit with us." The invitation marked his formal acceptance back into the community he'd nearly destroyed. Federal agents documented evidence, ensuring Kozlov's network faced justice. Linda moved between patients, her nursing skills enhanced by respect earned through shared danger. Donnie read quietly in the corner, avoiding media attention. Mr. Chun distributed soup to everyone involved. "What happens now?" David asked. "We rebuild stronger," Harold replied. 3 months later, Golden Dragon reopened with a celebration spanning generations. The larger, brighter dining room featured a memorial wall honoring lost community members. Donnie occupied his corner booth, anonymity impossible after becoming a neighborhood legend. Rex worked security, transformed from bully to protector. Harold and May resumed their weekly ritual at Table 7. Linda had graduated nursing school, specializing in elderly immigrant care. Mr. Chun emerged with a fusion dish symbolizing their united community. "Mr. Yen, join us," Harold called, raising his teacup. Donnie folded his newspaper, understanding this invitation meant family acceptance. Outside, the Richmond district continued peacefully, a community that had discovered its strength. The Golden Dragon watched over them all, protection proven stronger than any criminal organization. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.